Grace and peace to you. I'm Matt Henderson, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Clarkesville, Georgia, and this is your Midweek Connection. It's the opportunity to catch some of the additional stories between Sundays. Last Sunday, we encountered the story of Ruth and how God used her faithfulness to her mother-in-law Naomi to bring about a blessing for both women. Ruth meets Boaz, who provides grace as she gleans, and God provides abundantly as the two marry and become the part of God's promise to the tribe of Judah. Now, we'll encounter that promise this Sunday as we reflect on David. But today I wanted to explore a bit of the story in between. You see, following the time that we read in Judges, God raises up a priest named Samuel, who serves as not just in the role of priest, but also as a judge and prophet, speaking God's word of fidelity and calling the people to faithfulness. But Samuel wasn't enough for the people, it seemed. They had their eyes on the ways of the world, the ways of the nations around them. You see, not only was Samuel not enough, but perhaps what they really were saying was that God was not enough. Now, 1 Samuel chapter 8. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. And they were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not follow in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us, like the other nations." But this thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Just as they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so also they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice, only you shall solemnly warn them, and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like the other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all that the words of the people, he repeated them to the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice, and set a king over them." Samuel then said to the people of Israel, "Each of you return home." We want to be just like the others, they cried. We want someone we can see, we can touch, we can understand. It is a cry that has been heard before. Remember back to Moses and the people at Sinai. As Moses was receiving the gift of the law directly from God, the people, fearful of thunder and lightning, fire and smoke, turned to Aaron and asked for a God they can see, a God they can control. The golden calf is constructed and the people dance around proclaiming, "You are our God who delivered us from Egypt. You we will worship." And so now, generations later, the people return to that same fallacy, the same fear, that although God has set them apart to be different than all the rest, that God's mysterious ways are too much for them to follow, too much to understand. Give us a king, they say. We want to be like the others. And what's interesting, perhaps, is that God doesn't respond punitively, but instead agrees and relents to the people's request. But it has to be done God's way. You see, back when Jacob, whose name was changed by God to Israel, was giving his final blessing to his 12 sons, it was to Judah that the blessing of being God's chosen line of kings was given. Genesis chapter 49, verse 10. "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him and the obedience of the peoples is his." You see, this is a prophecy. And it should be noted that Israel's first king, Saul, is not from the tribe of Judah, but is a Benjamite. Now, Saul is said to be the ideal human king, tall, strong, a mighty warrior, but we'll see that the traits of a good human king did not line up with what God desires for God's people. What seems to work for other nations doesn't really always work, and it isn't how God works. God instead seeks a humble, faithful, Spirit-led heart that will shepherd God's people. And that leads us to a young boy, a shepherd from Bethlehem of the tribe of Judah, whose story we will experience on Sunday. So, until then, the peace of Christ be with you.